All right, so this is Let's Talk About the Deep Stuff. I'm your host, Sean Kneese, and this is my co host, Harrison Storms. And we have off the cuff conversations about the big topics on the show. And on this episode, I wanted to explore the concept of self, which I think is not really a concrete thing. Like, it's not a consistent thing. Like, I feel like at many different stages of my life, I've been many different people, or I've thought about myself in different ways, and I felt different ways about myself. But I think throughout all of that, like, there was something that was consistent, and that's sort of like the self beyond the self, or like the observer. I know in Hinduism they talk about the Atman, which I think is kind of a similar concept. And our guest today, Christopher J. Smith, he's he's a spiritual teacher and he's a life coach as well, and he also has a YouTube channel. What's the name of your most current YouTube channel?
Yeah, it's just Christopher J. Smith.
And you talk about um, a lot of topics such as spirituality and being in the present, and a lot of the ideas I found in Buddhism and other Eastern traditions. So why don't you just introduce yourself, talk about what you do a bit more, and then we can get into this topic, which I know is a topic you've talked about a lot as well.
Sure. Yeah, so essentially it's I kind of facilitate, I guess, self-realization. And that's, of course, the realization of the self, which I think, going to get into in a bit. But yeah, basically through retreats, through working with people one-to-one, it's just simply some simple guidance, some simple pointers to help people come to see what they really are beyond the mind. And that's basically what the YouTube channel is primarily about as well.
And how did your spiritual journey begin? Because I know on my old show, BSing, you told me a bit about it, how you sort of came to the spiritual beliefs you have now.
Yeah. Some suffering, some emotional and mental suffering, always a good teacher. But the main sort of, I guess, shift that took place was I was sat in a churchyard. I used to go and sit in this churchyard, bit of peace and quiet there, just sit and reflect, contemplate. I used to often contemplate the nature of impermanence, which is a great place to do it in a graveyard. And I was just sat and I had this kind of contemplation that was kind of just coming through. And it was just simply, I was looking at a tree and the thought came, what happens if you look at the tree without thinking about the concept tree? Can you see what this actual thing is that's in front of you that you're calling a tree? And for some reason, that just sort of sparked a realization in which all of a sudden my thought process just kind of fell away. And it was like seeing the tree for the very first time. And in that, there was like the colors became more vast, more vivid. There was a sense of expansiveness, like a kind of panoramic experience. And I don't know how long this lasted for, but the sense of time was kind of non-existent. And so there was this kind of wave of bliss that came, but there was also this kind of thought that then came, which was, hold on a second, where am I? Because one moment I'm sat there looking at a tree and there's a reference point of me and this tree. And then all of a sudden, both kind of reference points dropped. And then it's like, okay, well, where am I? So then I kind of look back kind of within to see where I was. And I couldn't find myself. And this kind of was then accompanied by this kind of wave of bliss, which I think was just a byproduct of kind of the relaxation and the freedom that was there from an absence of of a self or a sense of a self,
Sounds like a
and
connection to nature as well in a way. And
connection to nature as well. Yeah, there was a sense of interconnectedness there, sense of oneness, if you will, that was there. I could not kind of see where I began or ended, in a sense. And that was, that happened, and that just stayed. That sense just stayed. It was like a light switch, just something flicked on and off. And ever since that point, I think when you obviously come into something that's you feel is profound, that has changed your point of kind of perception in some way, then kind of naturally you want to sort of share that with others.
Hmm.
And so that's kind of how it all sort of started, I guess. Yeah.
And I guess looking at things from that perspective, you can be more accepting to, especially of yourself. Like we tend to be harder on ourselves than other people. Like I know, and I know with me, like I go into like either like, oh, I'm the greatest guy in the world, or like, oh, I get into the opposite, like all this negative self talk. But the one thing that kind of gets me out of that is I realize throughout all of that, there's something that's consistent. Like who am I? Because it's the same person throughout all those different ways I'm viewing myself, or maybe if like, oh, I acted a way I didn't like in one situation, or I like to, or I feel better about myself in this other situation. Like it's the same. There's something that's consistent throughout all of that, or maybe when I went through different phases when I was younger, or like changing myself, finding who I was. Like there's a self that's always consistent, like from when I was a child till now, and I guess that's kind of the what you've talked about in some of your videos, the observer, like kind of the self that beyond the self that's just observing.
it's like the human consciousness, like what you think is right and wrong. I feel in ways.
Hmm. Yeah. I mean, if you were to ask most people, who are you? What is this self? Most people would start saying, well, they'd say the name, they would say their job, they would say their past experiences, they would say their race, their nationality, their gender. But actually, what I came to see is that, and I think we can all see this, is that all of these things are completely changeable in terms of they come and go. And once you see that these things are coming and going, as you kind of alluded to, there's something there that has been kind of aware and watching and witnessing all of those different changes taking place, and it itself has not changed. So when we were young, we were kind of aware of this child's body and all the experiences of being a child. Then we were aware of a teenager's body, a young adult's body, and an adult's body. So it's like there's been something there that's been watching and witnessing all of this change take place, but it itself has not changed.
Yeah. And I think when you're a teenager, that's like when you start getting more caught up in this. Like when you're a kid, I think I remember being more present and just taking things day to day. And then adolescence, you start thinking about, well, who am I more?
What
That's what starts to.
what about
Yeah.
the people who it does change occasionally?
Mm. So I would say that's because if there is a sense of a self that's changing, that's because it's a mind identity and the mind identity is changing.
Hmm.
So, in other words, it's like what we believed when we were a child, we don't believe when we're maybe a teenager or a young adult. So, the belief systems are changing, thoughts are changing, perspectives are changing, but there's also still something that's even watching that.
Yeah,
There's something that's even still aware of all these different perspectives, that can be aware of a belief that was there one moment and a new belief that is there the next moment.
that would be my
So,
question too, or like because I really do like that a lot. So then, would you say people do change? Because I've never liked the quote saying people don't change. Because
mm,
I personally, I feel experienced the change.
hmm. So to me, there's two aspects. You've got the changeless and then the changing. So we could say that there is a thought-based sense of self that is constantly changing, constantly morphing. But then there is a kind of self, this one that we're kind of pointing to as a kind of witness. And by the way, witness or awareness, that's just a word, so it can't be that. Really what I found is that it's a mystery. There's something there that's this mystery of self that's aware of all of this change, and it can be aware of the self or a sense of self that seems to be constantly changing. So yeah, most people throughout life, they are changing, they're growing, they're learning, but that's on the mental level.
And there are
There's
some who
something
don't.
underneath that.
You're right.
Say that again?
There are some people who don't change and just end up wanting to stay at that certain level of mindset, I guess. If that's the way you're saying it. It sounds. My apologies.
Well, I would say that actually when we look at it, I would say that everyone is changing to some degree, but probably there's people that change a little bit less than others. They're a little
Got
bit
it.
more stuck.
I see. Or in the opposite direction, that would be good for them. Or
maybe so. I mean, I would say that this is the mind state where it's based on conditioning and programming, rigid belief systems.
Because a bad habit or something that's not serving you that you get caught up in, it might be part of your identity that you've created, and that's why it's so hard to break. And
that's it.
Sort of freeing yourself from that identity could help you change that and work on that too.
Yeah, the moment that you get identified as being something limited, as being the mind, then what's going to happen is that the sense of identity is going to want to protect that and keep that. So if you think that you are, if you're into politics and you think that you are a liberal person, let's say, then you're going to want to hold on to and protect that identity because you think it's who you are. Mm-hmm. So to be without that, you would think that it's a loss of your own self. Mm. So this is how, and this is really what
that's why people are in echo chambers, like only listening to what validates their worldview, because it would change their sense of self if they took in something new that contradicted what they believe.
Right, yeah. So like with a belief system, there's always the compulsion to want to validate that belief system and to prop that belief system up, to reinforce it, to fortify it, keep it in place. And so that's the danger of a belief system and a limited sense of identity, is it can become a trap. And so this is what, all the ancient traditions have kind of been pointing to this, is that this sense of self that most people perceive themselves to be is a kind of trap. And it traps them in a kind of illusory, separate sense of experience, which cuts them off from that true self, which is the expansive self, the kind of the non-dual self, if you will. Yeah.
And that's what Taoism talks about a bit about too, like the yin and the yang is, I guess, sort of like everything, like how everything balances. I feel like Taoism talks about that a bit too.
Yeah. What is it? It says the Tao cannot be spoken. Mm-hmm. If it can be spoken, it is not the true Tao. I think that's what it says, isn't it? So this is going back to what we're saying, is the mystery of this self. And this self is not, if we look at it, the self is not something that is located in one spot. Mm-hmm. So when I take people through exploration, what I do is I try to guide people from looking at this kind of changing sense of self, and then we kind of peel the layers back towards that unchanging self. And when people try to find that unchanging self, they can't seem to find it in a particular location. So it's not localized somewhere. And I think even actually science is kind of coming to this conclusion. You might have heard of the term non-local consciousness. They use the term consciousness. They'll say that consciousness is non-local. So it's not fixed to a certain position. It's actually, in a sense, everywhere and nowhere simultaneously.
So, I guess in a way, the concept we have in ourselves of what most people have of what their self is, of what their identity is not really a real thing. It's just kind of like based on thoughts in their head. Or also, people can kind of make a concept of who you are too. Like, oh, this person is this way, this person's that way, but that's just thoughts in their head. Or if someone has the thoughts about themselves, it's just thoughts, but that's not really what their true self is. It's just thoughts.
Yeah. Well, when someone says me or my or I, what is that? That is, like you're saying, it's just a thought. And this is why one thing that can be done is to kind of look and trace back. Where is this sense of I? Where is this I thought? Where is this me? Again, looking back and saying, where is it kind of located? And this is where certain sages and mystics in the past have said, it's, can you find the I behind the I? There is an I behind the I, or the self behind the self.
Yeah.
And can you find that? So this is where really we have to explore, because it's no good to just speak about this in words necessarily. I mean, the words can be a pointer, but the moment that we rest upon a word to be what it is, we've actually turned it into another concept. And so then it's hiding from us again. We've obscured it.
Yeah. Like it's been called in different religions, different things, like the Atman or Buddha nature. And I think even if you interpret Christianity in a certain way, you could view the kingdom of heaven as being that rather than a place you go when you die. Sort of getting in touch with that higher self. Like, to me, that's what God is in a way, is that higher awareness, is that. And there's a guy, Neville Goddard, talked a bit about that too. He used a lot of references from the Bible and like allegories to talk about that as well. But I think kind of all religions in a way are kind of pointing to that higher awareness, and it's just different ways of explaining it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. They're using the language of their time.
Yeah.
The language of their time, the language of their people, trying to speak about it. And such as Jesus, he would often say, it is like this, it is like that. So he'd use parables to say it is like this, it is like that. But he would always say, it is like this, not it is this. And so that's the thing with the words. The word is a pointer. It's like the old saying, isn't it? If someone is pointing at the moon, then don't become fixated on the finger. If you become fixated on the finger, then you're not going to see the moon.
Yeah.
And that's the same with this, is this investigation. Exploration is about only using thoughts or words as a pointer, and then looking at that which is before thoughts, before words, before concepts, and being able to kind of look at that directly. I call it direct perception. So we shift into our direct perception. Normal perception is just thinking. Direct perception is that we're looking right now in our own experience, and we have to become still and quite quiet to kind of take a look at that. And each time it's fresh. This is the beautiful thing about it, is that the moment that we think we have an answer of what we are, of what the self is, we can guarantee that's not it. The moment we think we know, we don't know. So the beauty is that the only way to really connect with it and to be it is we have to directly perceive it freshly each time. So we have to keep looking freshly. And eventually, as someone keeps looking, it will become more and more obvious and more clear, more and more natural as to what you essentially are.
And you made me think of, and also what you said about where just how we can only point to what it is, made me think of Zen.
Jesus, sorry guys.
Oh, there we go. A Zen sneeze right there.
That's it. Yeah, that's it. That is what is.
Yeah. but I was just thinking of a Zen Proverbs, how they don't really they kind of just point to, like, they make sense, like, but it's hard to explain why they make sense. Like, they kind of point, and Alan Watts was talking about how they have the same effect as a joke, like, only instead of making you laugh, it gives you an aha moment. Like, this points to, now I get it. Like,
That's it. Yeah, yeah. Zen, like a Zen koan,
yeah,
a Zen koan where it almost creates a sense of bewilderment, where it's not a puzzle for the mind to solve. This is where the traps come in, certainly on the spiritual path or when it comes to self-realization, is that we're so used to using the mind that we're trying to solve this so-called puzzle of the self by using the mind. We're trying to come to an intellectual answer, to a conclusion. And that's the whole thing with a koan, a Zen koan, is that you can't find an intellectual answer to it. And so it's acting, like you've said, as a pointer instead. So it's like saying that, it's like saying that a sign that says New York is New York. It's not New York. The only way to know this so-called place called New York is to go and walk around it, experience it directly.
and really,
Then you'll
New York is a concept too, because it's all part of the same. It's just a certain region of, like, the same place. Like, it's only New York because we made the concept like this is New York. But are we really in New York, or are we just in the place that we're calling New York?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Even deeper. Yeah. Even deeper. Yeah. So the point is really that it's just a signpost. Everything's just a signpost, a guidepost. It's like looking at a menu in a restaurant and then thinking that the menu is the actual food itself. No, you have to taste the food itself. The only way to know what that is pointing to is to actually taste the food itself directly.
But that's interesting. That now that I think about it, like, when people eat something and like they're like, oh, they usually ask, oh, what is this? Like, they want to be able to put that label on it rather than just why it really. But does it matter what it is? You're just enjoying the meal. Like,
yeah, it's a whole different experience. Pretty cool when you just start eating without having a concept of what you're eating.
Yeah,
because all of a sudden you might find that the whole taste changes. It's amazing how the concept is so powerful that actually the concept is generating the experience. This is why it is said that when you realize the true self, it's beyond concept. So you don't know what you're experiencing. It's beyond experience. The famous spiritual teacher Jiddu Krishnamurti, he said that when a child is taught that a bird is a bird, they never see that bird ever again. So as people are going about their daily life, because they've got all these concepts, and it's basically memory, as they're looking around, that is what's creating their experience. Their experience is being created by the mind. But when we shift to the true self, we actually go beyond experience. And of course, that's like, well, what's the experience of no experience? Yeah. You can't explain that. You can't say that what that is. It's a mystery. So we can only taste it. We have to directly taste it.
You have to experience it for yourself. I just thought of the Morpheus in the Matrix saying to Neo, nobody can be told what the Matrix is. You just have to experience it for yourself.
That's it. That's it. Yeah. Yeah. And in this sense, it's not even an experience, but we have to use some kind of word. So it is like a direct experience. That's the word that I use.
That's probably the best way to put it. Yeah. Huh.
So this is one of the kind of traps that can happen, is that there's an approaching this with the intellectual mind. And there's always going to be a limitation to that. It's like kind of taking a taxi ride to a destination. Once the taxi takes you there, you don't stay in the taxi, you get out of the taxi, and the taxi doesn't need to be used anymore. You've arrived at that destination. So in the very same way, whether it's a teaching, whether it's knowledge, whether it's a practice, it can only take you so far. It can kind of be like a vehicle that takes you up to that point, up to the precipice, and then you have to kind of abandon that practice or that pointer so that you can then literally be in that mystery. And then once you rest in that mystery and hang out there a little bit, then things start to become much clearer. Becomes more natural, more normal. And this is where I usually ask people then the question, your true self, can you find it as an object? Can you find it as a thing?
Seems like it's an energy. Electricity flow through your brain.
Can you pinpoint that?
The brain works very, very oddly. Everyone else has a different pattern, so to say, it seems.
And if you can pinpoint it, let's say you can feel it.
Yeah.
What is aware of that feeling?
I think everyone, themselves are the only ones who can feel their own energy.
And what is
but I think
self?
you're talking more about like who is the one feeling the energy, like who's the outside. You're talking about like the observer, the thing, what's always present, observing you, even when you're not aware of it.
Yeah.
But
That's
like,
it.
I get it too because I don't know. I like it because I feel like what I mean by energy is people can pick up on your energy, and if it's similar to your own, that's kind of what creates. It goes even deeper than just yourself. You create friends and stuff with the way you are. I don't know. I don't know
these
the
are
words. It's hard to say.
Yeah. But if we notice the quality of that, like it still has the quality of changeability to it, to some kind of changeability, to some kind of location, some kind of movement, right?
Mhm.
So what we're kind of pointing to here is that what is it that is not changing at all, which is able to even be aware of this energy as well and the play of this energy? You know, there's something that's even aware of that change.
Yeah.
So, and
So
you're saying it's beyond like or dislike. Like this person resonates with me, or that you're talking about something that's kind of beyond that. That's just observe. That's more neutral. Would you say this is more neutral? This or
inclusive.
inclusive?
I would say it's inclusive. So this is the powerful part about it is that it's like there can be a recognition. Okay, it is changeless, as opposed to the changing things, changing reality.
So I need to call my sister.
But then there's a realization that it includes that as well. So it includes the changeless. Sorry, it includes the changing as well as just being changeless. You know, so it becomes, it's like inclusive in nature, a complete inclusiveness. So everything is included in that. What I say is like, it's like the ocean, you know, if like, you know, you can see the different waves on the ocean, big wave, small wave, and all of those waves, really there are no waves. There's only the ocean. We just call these different waves, but
So
really
it's
it's
like
just
all
the
part
ocean.
of. So it's all part of the same thing. It's like one big organism. Everything. It's all one big consciousness. One big. Is that what you mean?
Yeah. So the ocean is like, really there are no waves, there's only apparent waves. Because really those so-called waves are just the ocean that is animated in a different form. So even the waves that are apparent, that seem to be different forms, are also made of the ocean. So in the very same way, this true self, everything that is changing, even though it is not ultimately the unchanging self, that which is changing is in a sense made of the unchanging self. Those appearances are made of that same one that is able to be aware of it, in which it itself is not changing.
Yeah, because I think a lot of the things that divide people or makes people think, oh, this person's so different from me, or this person, they're really just superficial things. And like, it's not, I think that on a higher level, we have more similarities than we realize, even if this person seems like, oh, they're so different. They're so like, this person's a bad, even like, oh, this person's a bad person or this, but I think it's just maybe they just were, that's the level they were on, but like with some of their act, or that they were just on a lower, um trying to pinpoint it, I guess. Like maybe even if somebody does something that's like you consider like a bad like deed or whatever, like it's like maybe that's just like the level of awareness they were on, but really on a
Yeah.
higher level they're not all that. Maybe there is like a better side to them too, or a better level they could be on as well.
Yeah, so the way that I kind of said that is that, you've got obviously conscious and then unconscious. And when we're operating through the egoic mind, which is that mental sense of identity, we're actually in a state of unconsciousness, because now that programming of thoughts and automatic thoughts is taking over. It's kind of like an automatic self.
Mhm.
So we're actually not conscious. We're just being taken over by programming. So that's unconsciousness. But once we realize the true self that is kind of underneath this program sense of self, then we actually become conscious. And that true consciousness, again, just a word, just a pointer, is obviously in every being.
Yeah.
It's in every single being, but whether a being or not, whether a being is aware of it or not is a different matter, of course. And
Yeah.
that's what awakening is, or realization is to wake up to that.
Yeah, and I think when you become aware of that, you're not gonna judge someone by, oh, this person is of this race, or they're this, I'm gonna judge them because of their gender or whatever other superficial thing. Even they follow this religion or they believe this, but when you're in that higher awareness, you can see, okay, yeah, and you realize that they're that higher awareness too.
I
Then
think that's where we go back to experience, because I feel like the experience is usually what unlocks it for most people. It seems. It's either
Yeah, this the differential in experiences, in perspectives, in beliefs. Um, these are all these kind of divisions that are really sort of created by the mind. Like we said earlier, when we use that analogy of the ocean and the waves, it appears like there's waves, like there's lots of different waves, big waves, small waves. But actually, when we look closer, there are no waves. It's just the ocean. What we call waves is just simply the ocean. All there is just the ocean. So, in the very same way, all of these seeming divisions are really just created by the mind. And in reality, there really is no division.
I love that.
There is no space. There is really no gap between what we call this body and those bodies.
There's always going to be waves no matter what.
There's always going to be the appearance of different phenomena.
Yep.
Yeah, changing
Love
phenomena.
that. I love that.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And maybe we can say that that's what this, the ocean likes to kind of play these different waves. That's the kind of the richness of experience, isn't it? Without that, you can't have this kind of diversity of experience.
It's the beauty in the ocean. It's honestly, it brings it to like the yin and yang. You can't have the beauty in the ocean without the bad and the good.
Yeah, yeah. This is what brings this kind of like a dualistic experience, isn't it? This
Yeah.
is the dualistic experience. But even though that dualistic experience is appearing to happen, underneath that, or in reality, there is only really the non-dual reality. It is the non-dual that appears to be dual in nature. And so once we awaken to that, it certainly doesn't negate our ability to continue to just be this kind of unique expression. You know, the source, the one, the true self wants to experience being that particular unique expression.
But it would bring more acceptance of other unique expressions, and we'd realize more the similarities we have, and we wouldn't there'd be less,
Yeah.
judging people or being at odds with one another because of stupid things like, oh, this person has a different color skin than me, or they believe something different. We realize that on a deeper level, we're the same in a lot of ways.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, because I guess the ultimate commonality that we have is that deeper dimension of self. Because really, what I have found is that that self is just one self. It is the same one self that every one self is. So it's in all bodies, in all things. So, I mean, you can't get a greater commonality than that, to unite people.
Yeah.
Do you think the mind and thoughts though can be a useful tool? Because I know Neville, there's
Can it be a useful tool?
can it be used? Yeah,
Absolutely, it can be a
like
useful
it could
tool.
kind of like
How do you think you? Okay, example. The mind is the most useful tool. You go to a poker game, and if someone's counting cards, they kick you out for a reason. Because you're going to win every time.
Yeah.
That the mind right there is proven to be a tool.
but also it kind of creates everything in your reality, like James Allen and like Neville Goddard and them talk about like the power of thought to kind of like if you think a certain way, it can or you if and also if you feel like something is true, it can kind of start manifesting in the physical world. I think there's a bit of a truth to that, just to a certain degree.
Absolutely.
So,
Like again, another example would be like, you go to work, right? And you enjoy the person at work smiling and listen to music and happy instead of the person who's always grumpy showing up to work. That their mindset is changing
contagious.
yours. Yes, it's contagious. People adapt, and if someone's happy at work, you're going to be like, damn, I'm happy to show up to work
I also
Monday.
think if people sometimes adapt to your perception of them too, like if you think this person's dishonest, they're gonna do this and that, then that person is more inclined to, I think, behave that way. They'll behave the way you think they're gonna behave too. Like if you put a judgment on them, because I think I think also like the way you see yourself kind of like is how other people see you, but also sometimes like if you see a person or you make an assumption about a person, they're gonna conform to those assumptions sometimes too. Like I just think that's
True.
yeah.
Some people like to follow.
Yeah.
Some people find something that they see more appealing than what they're doing at the moment because they might feel a little.
But I'm saying like also like if you assume like, oh, so this person's gonna act in a negative way or they're gonna be untrustworthy, and they really sense that that's how you feel about them, like I think sometimes then they'll be like they'll conform to that. But if you think, oh no, I think you're capable of being good, you can do this and that, then they'll be like, I think it's unconscious though, like then they'll be like, okay, I'm gonna act in this good way.
I see that.
Mm-hmm.
You're right.
Yeah.
Well, most people want to be liked. Most people want to be liked. That's a deep need that many people have, and I would say that comes from because at a young age we at some point became disconnected from that true nature. So then we seek validation from others. So of course, if someone thinks they can get appreciation by being a certain way, then they're going to do that. But it's like, you've probably heard the saying before that the mind is a lousy master, but it is a humble servant. Yeah. So as we awaken to the true self, we kind of step beyond the mind, and that's the only true way that we can really use the mind fully to its full capacity. Otherwise, really, the mind is kind of using us. If we're still identified with the mind in some way, then what's going to happen is that the mind is going to kind of come of its own accord. It comes automatically. It takes us over, and then we're not using the mind is using us. So true empowerment to me is that once we really realize the self and we're able to step beyond the mind and we're in that sort of stillness, if you will, then we can actually use the mind, and we can use it practically, and it's a good tool.
It's when
It's a
it's
good
the
tool.
most important tool you
Yeah.
have.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you have to be the
powerful tool.
master of your mind, not let the mind be the master of you. And that's what like James Allen and Asman think of as kind of talking about how the mind could be a useful tool. Like if you're the one who's like totally in control of it and your thoughts, and rather than letting it kind of run you, which is I guess which is kind of the default state that people are usually in.
Hmm.
Well, what I talk about is like kind of three sort of stages, if you will, or three unfoldments that kind of take place. So first, there is when we go into direct exploration, which is really what we have to do to truly realize the true self. Is once we've awoken to the self, we then get in touch. We're quiet enough to be able to listen to that true inner voice, that true resonance. We all have a true resonance within us that is constantly trying to guide us in life. And most people, they can't hear that because it gets drowned out by all of the conditioning and the programming. So they're only be able to hear the voice of the egoic mind, and they're not hearing the voice of that inner resonance. Once we can hear the voice of the inner resonance, we can begin to follow it. And if it is a yes or if it is a no, it is always a yes. Because whatever it says, if we just follow it, it's always leading us in the right direction. And so I just call that following truth. And then once we are able to follow truth, there's a kind of, we could maybe call it a kind of quantum recreation that kind of takes place where we can kind of recreate the way that we are, this body is, the way that the mind is, the way that our life circumstances are, but it's done in a very spontaneous, natural way. It's not like there is someone necessarily taking the reins of the mind and trying to steer it in a certain direction or manipulate it. It's more of a natural kind of flow where we're kind of just coming from that true nature
It's not
in a
something
very
random
joyful and
steering
playful
you.
way.
It wouldn't be something random. It would be you attempting to steer it, I'd say, right? Like yourself, your physical self compared to the one, or your conscious, since we all connect in that way, but the consciousness tells everybody something different depending their genes, the way they were raised, experiences, whatever. I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I do know, but I love the topic, and it's making me think a lot about it.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that it's a very spontaneous thing. You see, when a lot of this material is heard, like law of attraction stuff and things like that, of course, it's very appealing because everybody wants to be able to kind of they want to control things to be able to get more of what they want. But I would say that is, the one that thinks it's in control is the mind. We've all been taught that we're in control to some degree. But when we look at this body and we look at the mind, I mean, how much are we really controlling of it? The body's breathing itself,
You,
the heart's beating by itself,
yeah,
the cells are regenerating by themselves. Right now, your neurons are firing off in your brain automatically by themselves just by listening to my words.
yeah.
We're not doing any of it. Thoughts come by themselves. So when we really look at things, the nature of life, the nature of this body and this mind, it's all kind of happening by itself. But there is something underneath that is this kind of mystery of self that we're pointing to, that is kind of watching that whole play take place. And it's a much grander intelligence in which when we awaken to it, that this body mind then becomes sort of spontaneously animated by it.
Yeah. And
Let's
you
say
can't really
that.
stop your thoughts, but you can choose not to get caught up in them or choose not to. You can just kind of watch them and let them kind of go and observe them and not get caught up in them. But you can't stop them from coming in, but you can not let them take control of you and not get too caught up in them.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I say that we've got like we've got the subtle choice of where we put the attention, basically, where we put the attention. So we can either have the attention in belief, believing the thoughts in the midst of those thoughts and stories and concepts and ideas, interpretations, agendas, or we can recognize, hold on a second, there's just thoughts here that's coming and going. Let me bring the attention, let me rest the attention kind of in itself at that kind of sort of silent awareness level, if you will.
Yeah.
And then we kind of offset, that's like a way of offsetting the mind almost. So we might have a stream of thought that comes automatically that's trying to take us over, some kind of story. And just by recognizing that, we can kind of disengage from it almost.
And I think a lot of what you're talking about can help people with the common thing people get wrapped up in do, and I get wrapped up in, is worrying about, oh, what this person thinks of me, or getting caught up in this person sees me this way, or and I think if you realize that that's not really you, that's just someone's thought in their head, like their concept of who you are, but that's not who you are, and that's and I think actually the first video I found of yours was one where you were talking about not caring about what people, how to not care about what people think, and you were saying like this person could have. You told the story of like there was a Sufi story you told, and you said that that one person was making a judgment he should do this, and then he did that, and then another person said, why are you doing this? And I forget the exact story, but it's like he couldn't please anybody, and then finally, and so it's like it's just just go with your own truth, your own, because it's
Yeah.
all just concepts, different perceptions on. It's not, none of it's real really. So
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. It's, you start to just follow your own inner guidance, your own truth, and you don't have to listen. And, really what I found, like when it comes to not minding what other people think, is that, you know, to be quite honest about it, most people, they're concerned with their own self.
yeah,
If they're locked into their own mind, they're not actually looking at anybody. They seem to be looking at other people, but really they're just locked into their own world. They're not actually that interested. So oftentimes people think that people are very interested in them when they are not.
Mhm.
So sometimes somebody can be self-conscious and be like, is this person judging me? What do they think about me?
That
When really most people are wrapped up in their own
yeah,
sort of bubble of experience anyway.
that's a cool thing about it too, though. Everyone's wrapped up in their own experiences, and like you said, you were opened up in a way about a tree, right? The tree brought it to you, and I'm not very religious, but in the Garden of Eden, the tree of life was there, and God said about the tree of life that He is so interested in everything growing their separate ways. Every branch grows their separate ways, and we are all the tips of the branch, all of us, but we are all still rooted at one.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's that oneness as diversity. Yeah, oneness as multiplicity. And somehow it seems that maybe we can say that, this source of true nature kind of enjoys the experience of this multiplicity. It likes to experience these different experiences.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And yeah, some branch might end up rotting where the other grows towards the sun a little better, but sadly, some die off and some will persevere. It's just how it works. It's how life is.
It's still all the same sauce, yeah. Still all
Exactly.
the same sauce, isn't it?
Yeah.
So yeah, with the not minding what other people think, is that, yeah, as we start to go our own way, we mind less and less. And I think there's a difference between not caring and not minding. So I often use the term not minding, because not caring can be kind of an attitude of the mind, an attitude of the ego, even like, yeah, I don't care. I don't care what anybody thinks.
It's true because
well,
everybody feels it. Everybody feels the death of the one branch.
Yeah, and you take that to the extreme, then you're gonna not care if you hurt people, or you're not gonna care because I think it's good to because what someone else thinks is valid. You don't have to agree with it. You don't have to change who you are. But I think
Yeah.
it's good to care about people. It's good to. That's not necessarily a negative thing, but it becomes bad when you get wrapped up in insecurities about it or basing your concept of yourself on it. But I think it's good to listen to and care what someone thinks because you want to learn from them. You want to hear. You want to because they're valid too. They're important too. With their perceptions valid too. So
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. So that's the difference between minding and caring. Is caring is an attitude of the egoic mind, let's say, whereas minding is just you don't think too much about it. So if you don't mind what somebody says about you, it just means you don't think too much about it. You don't pay too much mind.
yeah,
You know what you
That's all
are
it is. Yeah,
inside.
it's not going to bother you. It's not going to disturb you. And that's what I found with, and what other people find with the true self is when you become really established in that, you don't mind what happens. You cannot be disturbed. Nothing can disturb you. Nothing can kind of shake you from that. But when we're operating in the mind, it's very easy to be disturbed, very easy to be triggered.
Yeah.
Whereas in the true self, we become triggerless.
it's kind of like I was just thinking about comparing it to acting in a way. It's if you don't like if you regret like how you acted and or how you were in the past or something you did or you can just view it as okay, well that was a character I played then that wasn't me. You don't have to identify with it or it's almost like the higher self is like it's like being an actor kind of like and just like the way you are at different stages. It's just that was a character you played, but it wasn't you. The higher self is the actor who was playing it.
I see. I see what you're
Right.
saying, but also I agree and disagree because depending the experience, sometimes it's not just it wouldn't be just acting. It sometimes the higher self will need to resort to survive or to do something that sadly sucks and will hurt others. Or and I'm only saying that because I feel like I've had a shitty experience with certain mistakes I've done that I wouldn't say it was just a game or acting, But you are.
Well,
I see.
I'm
I
talking
see the
about
comparison.
like not identifying yourself with it,
Oh,
like
okay.
that's
So
not you, like
no, okay,
not
yeah,
making that
yeah.
whole
You
yeah.
know it's not yourself, but
So you
you
don't
just
keep
do the
so you
action,
don't
and
keep feeling like you don't have to keep beating yourself up about it because that was you don't have to who you were then and what you did then. You don't have to make that who you are now. You don't have to
exactly. It,
identify.
it, it isn't always who
Yeah,
you are. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, okay, my
Yes.
bad. I misunderstood what you were saying for a
yeah.
second. But
It's like, I think it's in the Bible, isn't it? It says, to be in the world, but not of the world. To be in the world, but not of the world. So you're fully, intensely involved in the world, playing the character, let's say, and to truly play it, to be playful as that character, and to play that character fully. But deep down, you always know you are not that character.
And Jim Carrey actually said something recently like that. He says he says I've enjoyed Jim Carrey has been a great character to play, but I realize now that's not me. I'm something above that.
That's it. Yeah, exactly, exactly. Yeah, and it's just like, as you guys know, with acting and that, it's like you can play a character and you can get super involved in that character, and maybe you can almost believe that you are that character, but deep down, you always truly know, I'm not the character. You'll play it to the best of your ability, but deep down, I am not the character. And so this is where we can kind of come kind of full circle, because in self-realization, what can often happen is that in this awakening of the kind of unchanging self, beyond the character, beyond the physical body, there can be a kind of sense of detachment that happens, a kind of aloofness. And that seems to be a phase that happens for a while, but it's not meant to be the end result. We kind of come back into the character then. It's like we relax back into the character. It's like yeah, let me play, Christopher fully. I want to play Christopher fully. Let me play him as fully as possible, Yeah, I know I'm not Christopher. I know that really there is no such thing as Christopher, but there's the apparent experience of Christopher. So let's play it fully.
Hell yeah.
And that comes from a total acceptance, a real acceptance that is required to be able to accept this body mind and the character in its entirety,
Yeah. And there's and it brings a lot of peace too.
Brings a lot of peace, yeah. Tremendous amount of peace.
Self-awareness is beautiful.
Yeah. It's like a lot of the, like monks, ascetic monks or yogis. Part of that initial phase is that they take themselves away from sort of worldly life and they have disregard for the body in many ways. They're not really concerned with the body because their whole focus is to go to the very source of that which is beyond the body and mind. But once that's been realized, then the body and mind and the so-called world can become included in that, becomes inclusive rather than exclusive. And that's the kind of non-dual shift that can take place. Because otherwise, there's still a kind of duality in that. If one is trying to stay aloof and one is trying to stay detached, there's still a kind of duality taking place there. There's not been a full sort of absorption or union. So once we can truly accept the character, the body mind just the way it is, accept the way that we speak, accept the way that we look, accept our skills, our intelligence, whatever. Once we accept it fully, it's almost like we illuminate it with our true unchanging nature in which it then transforms it. This is like the real alchemy, if you will. We really begin to then actually transmute the body and mind and we bring it to a higher level, to a more godly, divine level, let's say.
Absolutely.
And that's
that's
how
a
you
whole
accept this
other
moment, like as it is too. It's just kind of
Yeah, yeah, it's including the moment as it is and the contents of the moment, the circumstances, whatever it may be, just to be with it fully, to surrender to it fully, allow it to all be there, include it all, embrace it if possible, and then that becomes transmuted as well. And it's like we're transmuting every aspect. It's like this is where it's more of an integrative kind of unfolding that takes place. There's a lot of kind of integration. It's like when people talk about shadow work or such. It's like you're integrating these certain aspects of the character into the light.
yeah. That's why, because I think that's an important part of growth too. Is you have to really you have to see what's good about yourself, but you have to acknowledge your flaws or your shortcomings, or maybe things that aren't serving you as well, and you have to
Yeah.
not beat yourself up for them, but you have to be very accepting of it and acknowledge that okay, that these are flaws that I have, and then through doing that, you're able to actually work on them and improve them because you're more aware of them, and I think
Absolutely.
people respect that too. Like if you think okay, sometimes I do this, sometimes I'm this way, and that doesn't serve me, or that's something I need to work on, because when they respect that, that you show you're aware of that. And
Be
you're
honest to
working.
yourself and others.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Self-honesty is massive. Absolutely huge. If there's no self-honesty, then it can become a blockage, a hindrance to growth and to expansion of the integration of the true nature with this particular body-mind experience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And sometimes people fall into two extremes, either being too hard on themselves and too dwelling on something they did in the past, or things they're doing wrong, or mistakes they made, and then some people are the other way, like I can do no wrong, I can do. So it's good to have that balance of being accepting of yourself and also being self-aware of your flaws and working on them as well.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Because like when oftentimes people think you must become saintly in nature, you know, You must, once you awaken, you must become like a saint.
Mhm.
And sure, that's one way for the one to express itself. That's certainly one way for it to express itself, but it's also valid to express itself in other diverse ways that you wouldn't consider as necessarily being saintly, you know?
But maybe our flaws kind of build our character. Maybe that's
It's
how you
not.
become
It's
it.
absolutely no. That's the
It's
point of
kind of,
experience.
Yeah.
Some
yeah,
flaws.
it's kind of seeing what, like you said, what serves you and what doesn't serve, you know? And we have to be really honest about that. Like, so, you know, it's like if there's something that we're doing with this body that's not really serving it, then do we continue or do we allow that to now become kind of rectified, you know? So these are the subtle, this is where again we're following the truth. We're listening to that voice of discernment. Do we listen to the egoic mind that's saying, you know, I have this craving and I want to follow this craving? Where's that coming from? Is that coming from the egoic mind or is that coming from the true nature? So we start to get really quiet and really still and be able to listen and discern between the voice of truth, that inner resonance, or the voice of, you know, the egoic mind or the conditioned mind.
Hmm.
And it's a case of which do we follow? And whichever one we kind of follow, then if we follow the voice of truth, then we start to integrate things more and we become more and more sort of aligned with true nature. The body and mind and the character becomes more aligned with true nature. But if we go in the opposite direction, then it becomes more misaligned from true nature.
Hmm.
You know, like a bit like in Star Wars, isn't it? You know, the light and the dark side kind
Yeah.
of thing. You
Oh
know,
yeah.
Yeah. But they
but there
kind of
is a way
needed
to.
they needed each other to kind of. You couldn't really have one without the other. They were both kind of
Exactly.
needed too, and that's why Anakin was the one who brought balance to the Force.
Anakin's not going to fight. Obi-Wan Kenobi
Yeah,
and Anakin aren't going to fight all good guys in the beginning of the story.
yeah. Because on the other side, that's imbalanced as well, isn't it? The ones, let's say, the light side, the ones that think that they're doing the saintly good. There's also can be an imbalance in that side as well. So there's got to be some kind of integration between those two. And that's really when we come into the heart. That's the balancing point, isn't it, in the heart? It's not our ideals or moral ideas of right or wrong. It's coming into the heart, and then there is a balance that's found between those two then.
And I think that kind of relates to what you're saying. What I've heard you say before about a knowing versus a belief. Like I remember before I asked, well, I did a podcast with you on my old show, and then I asked you about your spiritual beliefs, and you said you wouldn't call it belief. You would say it's more of a knowing, an inner knowing that you've experienced rather than belief.
I love that.
Yes. Yeah. Because, you know, belief, I mean, if we even look at the word belief, if you take the F off of the end and you put a dash between the B, you have be lie. You know, so a belief is a lie. When we operate through beliefs, we're operating through a lie. Because a belief is always about something that's not in our direct experience. That's why we have to believe it. You know, so when we're just operating from our direct experience, direct perception, we don't have to believe anything. When we're just operating from that, we see the truth. We see and we know directly what is true because we can literally see it. We can sense it, we can see it. Whereas a belief is always about something that's outside of our direct
Mm-hmm.
experience.
But do you think you could sometimes know something that isn't in your direct experience? It's just kind of like an inner knowing.
It depends.
Yeah.
So to say, if it's something you heard or you would, that was when English would come in and say, "I believe this is true," but you don't.
What's an example that you would give of something that you're saying that you could potentially have an inner knowing of, but it's not in your direct experience?
Hmm.
So to say, so to say, you didn't experience it, but a friend did, right? And they told you about it and tried to get you to do, so to say, thing to experience it and be like, "Oh wow, that was good," but that's only a simple situation in the topic. That's only when it comes to just situational material. Or
It's like right now. It's like if one of you guys say to me, right, I've got a nice red Ferrari that's
exactly.
parked
Yo,
outside.
come visit us. We have a red Ferrari outside. We'll take you for a joyride. But
Sounds
otherwise,
good.
if it's something that I would say where you're saying, if it's just a belief, like, so the Native Americans worship the sun, and Christianity worships a God sitting in the clouds. Like the belief is
Mm.
the God was they were able to see the sun.
Well, this has got a lot of people into a lot of trouble, hasn't it? I mean, I would say that a lot of the conflict in the world, I would say all of the conflict in the world throughout history has been between belief systems. One
Absolutely.
person's belief system versus another person's
All
belief system.
all conflict is all lie. All the conflict
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
lie.
So it's like right now, it's like if you say you've got a Ferrari outside, I don't know that for certain. I can only either believe you or disbelieve you,
Exactly.
you see? But if I see it with my own eyes, now I can say, I know
It,
he has a Ferrari, you see?
yeah.
So so when we look in our own direct experience, when we glimpse our true nature and the true nature of reality, which can only be in this moment, not in the future, not in the past, no future, then we actually come to see it and we then have that a knowing of it. Then we directly know it, whereas everything else is a belief. Maybe what you're referring to, correct me if I'm wrong, Sean, is like an intuition.
Yeah, yeah. Like I know this about this person. Like I know, a lot of times someone meets someone, they're like, I knew she was like me and her, like we had a connection. I knew, or I'm trying to
Yeah,
think. Or Carl Jung talked about knowing for, like
yeah,
he said that he knew, like he
yeah.
talked about the knowing, like he was agnostic, like he knew
Yes.
like that there was something more, like through his mystical experiences. Uh,
Now,
Yes.
now my question
So,
to that is, what if your knowing was proved wrong?
so I was just going to say actually because I've encountered many people. In fact, someone recently that I know, and they were convinced that they'd kind of met their soulmate. Right? They were just convinced this is my soulmate. And they were together for a while, and then very quickly they've now parted. So that conviction that she had was obviously proved wrong, or she was picking up on some kind of energy at that moment. They obviously
That
needed
was a
to come into
belief.
contact with each other. They needed to come into contact with each other for something, um, but it wasn't what she thought it was. So we have to be very careful with. I would say with these intuitions. That's why I say the only thing I truly know is this direct experience.
hmm.
You know, that's the only thing that I can truly know is this direct experience.
And what about someone says, I know I was meant to do this. I know I was meant to.
It can either go
Yeah.
great or go horribly wrong.
Well, that would be like saying a sense of purpose, wouldn't it? Now, the thing with the purpose is, let's say your purpose is to make a film, a certain film. You're like, my purpose is I've got to make this film. It's going to be massive. It's going to be huge. And then you make the film. Well, now where's the purpose gone? Because now you've fulfilled it. You see. So then you've got to create another purpose, and another purpose, and another purpose. So, so I would say that maybe the true purpose is what is here right now, whatever is taking place right now, in a sense.
It's interesting. I
Rather
remember
than,
I was recently having that kind of conversation with someone, um, at this improv group I go to. I didn't catch the 11:11 thing, so I got caught up in kind of this magical thinking, like, oh, if I went on the 11:11 train, like that would maybe that was where I was supposed to go, like, yeah, and everything. And he goes, and then he was saying, well, you'll never know because the only reality there is now is where you didn't get on that train. and the only thing that matters now is us now having this conversation. And he said he learned that from acting, like his acting teacher told him about being in the present. But it was very similar to like the Buddhist concept, even though he actually hadn't really looked into that himself. It was kind of the same thing he was saying. But all that matters is now, and all that should be getting your full attention is just here right now, this conversation we're having. Because that other reality where you went on that train doesn't exist.
Well, in a sense, really, when you look at it, it should be obvious, shouldn't it? That should be obvious. It's like right now, we're talking, and it should be obvious that this is all that exists right now.
Yeah.
So therefore, this is the only purpose right now. So whatever is existing, whatever the moment holds, whatever the content of the moment is, maybe we can say that is the purpose. Or you can say there is no purpose. Whichever way you want. You could say there is no purpose because there is no future. Or you could say that this is the purpose, whatever's taking place.
And neither one's necessarily good or bad, because you could just enjoy the moment even if there is no purpose, too.
You could instead live on purpose.
Yeah.
Now.
Yeah.
I love that.
Live now on purpose.
Hell yeah.
So, any final thoughts or things you'd like to say before we wrap up?
Only that it's been a joy to connect with you both, and thanks for inviting me on here and that. It's been nice to talk about this. It's always one of my favorite things to talk about. So
thank you, Christopher. I'd like to ask where's your accent come from? I don't know as much about you as well as Sean.
Yeah, so I'm based in England,
awesome.
In the UK, in England. Yeah, so I'm sort of the northish of England. Yeah, so Yorkshire accent.
It's good. Love the accent, sir.
Thank you.
And a lovely conversation. I love your insight on everything. I've learned a lot today.
Is your YouTube channel the best place to find you, or where would you say people should look?
Yeah, people can find me at ChristopherJSmith.com. That's the website, or Christopher J. Smith on YouTube. They're really the main two spots. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you for coming on. It's been great chatting with you. So.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you for having me.
No problem. And we'll keep in touch. Yeah.
Definitely.
Yep.
Definitely.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right.